Hello and welcome to the 1/106 of a second photography podcast. This episode is a little bit out of order. I had planned to release my episode on Ricoh GR3 review. However, because of things that are going on, I've decided to record a more topical episode. So this episode is about how the coronavirus has affected my photography. I can't talk for how it's affected other people's photography, although no doubt I will touch on subjects where other people are affected. I wanted this episode to be topical and recorded at a time when it has had an effect on my photography. So I'm going to talk now about how it's had an effect on my photography and how it's also not had an effect on my photography. So I recently wanted to plan a trip to Dublin. I wanted to do a street photography trip in Dublin. And I thought I'll just go for the weekend. I'll fly over from one of the London airports, get into Dublin, stay a couple of nights, fly back, not a problem. I didn't have a passport. So I went and I got my passport. I got it really quickly. And then the coronavirus outbreak hit. And at the time, it wasn't really in the UK. So at the moment, we're now in March and there are cases reported in the UK, and sadly people have died, and today it was declared that coronavirus is a pandemic. Don't forget, I record my episodes a little bit ahead of when they're released, so today it was declared a worldwide pandemic. At the time when I was planning my trip and I was about to go, it was very much countries were in the containment phase. I ended up not going, not because I was worried about things. Well, I was worried about things. Let me explain that. At the time, anyone who was travelling from countries that had had a coronavirus outbreak, places like China and various other places, you had to self-isolate for 2 weeks or you were kept in quarantine. This was around the time when all the cruise ships couldn't dock anywhere. So I was thinking I could go on my trip to Dublin and probably everything will be fine, but I could find when I'm coming back I get stuck for 2 weeks, and that sort of made a weekend trip not worth it. So what I didn't want was to have to spend 2 weeks in isolation for just 1 or 2 days in Dublin. It didn't seem worth it to me, and I might get ill as well and I might give it to my family. So I decided I won't go. So I cancelled my trip. Now I would do trips within the UK because I wouldn't have that fear of being stuck and quarantined because I'm staying in the UK where I live. So then I thought, well, would I go and do street photography in my favourite place to do street photography, London? And I probably would, but I am slightly put off by packed train carriages, so I would do it at a quiet time if I were to do it. So to summarise, my trip to Dublin is off for the moment, and I effectively cancelled it because of coronavirus, and I'm probably more reluctant to go into London to do street photography than I would be normally, just because I don't want to be in a stuffy train with loads and loads of people at the moment. It will just, as I see it, increase my risk of catching the virus. But I have been doing lots of street photography even in the outbreak of coronavirus, but I've been doing it in my local town and a city near to where I live. So I have changed how I do things. I've driven there for a start, and I haven't gone into London, and I haven't gone on my trip. So it has changed my practice of photography. And ultimately, I don't think it's worth it for a photo. You hear about people who have had a bad accident or died trying to get something for Instagram, and I read those stories or hear those things, and I think it's not worth it for a photo. It's not worth it. And that's sort of how I feel at the moment. It's not worth putting myself and my family through any additional risk. So no trip to Dublin and probably no trips to London. Now I also do fashion photography, and I work with people and I work with models and various other people. And thinking about this episode, I thought, well, would that change? And probably it wouldn't change. I can be a suitable and safe enough distance away from someone. I'm not getting very close to someone when I do these things, so probably that wouldn't change. But I probably would feel more comfortable working with someone who I knew rather than a complete stranger. So when you do TF or paid shoots or any of these shoots that I do, most of the time I'm working with someone I haven't met before. It's very occasional, and it's actually very rare. More often than not, I will work with someone who I haven't met before than I'll work with someone I previously met before. So that means I'm meeting a stranger who I've no idea and no way of gauging their health other than if they're very, very sick. So I probably wouldn't stop doing that, but I would probably have reservations, probably be more guarded while doing that, and probably more alert to and more sensitive to prevention of getting coronavirus. So those are me doing photography, but there are other things related to photography. So one of the things is there are photography shows, there are photography gatherings, much like music, sporting events. There are events that go on, and various sporting events have been cancelled, and the photography show has been cancelled. And I've got to say, I'm really not that bothered. I've been to the photography show, and I've been to another sort of show and event, and it's quite good to go if you're after getting gear or you're going to go to one of the workshops. And I don't want to sound arrogant when I say this, but at the moment I feel there's not much more I need to learn, and probably what I could learn or need to learn I could watch on YouTube. So sort of going to the photography show to get to look at gear and try it out, well, I'm not in the market for getting more gear because I've just traded up and got a new camera, so I'm not really looking for that. Getting things like looking at wedding albums and other things that a trade photographer would do, I'm not that interested in because I don't do it. And going to sort of talks and other things, again, it doesn't really grab me at the moment. And of course I could go to the photography show to do YouTube videos and things like that. However, when I watch those things on YouTube, I do find them boring, just interviewing someone at a trade or event show, asking them about it and getting a demonstration. I find that a little boring, and there'll be hundreds of those videos anyway, so I wouldn't even do it for that. So the photography show's cancelled, but it won't affect me. One thing that will affect other photographers is new cameras and gear, because like everything, cameras are made in China, or if they're not made in China, one of the components for them is made in China. So there will be inevitably a potential delay for new releases. Now, I think there is a problem with one of the new Fuji cameras, the X-T4. Again, I'm not going to buy that, but I was very tempted to upgrade to the Fuji X100V. I've had the Fuji X100, the original. I've used the Fuji X100F, and I was very, very tempted to get the Fuji X100V. And what put me off was the price, and what put me off was the practicality of it. And in the end, I opted for the Ricoh GR3, and I think I've made the right decision. And in my head, this was a future episode about the differences between the X100V and the Ricoh GR3 and why I picked one over the other. But I'll probably save that for after, when the review of the Ricoh GR3 has come out, and I'll cover it in an episode after that. And while I'm not getting the X100V and I'm not getting the X-T4 and I'm not getting any new cameras at the moment, other photographers will be affected by this, and other consumer things will be affected by it. There will be delays. Probably not going to matter if you put it on pre-order or if things have already landed in the UK or your country of residence, but that will certainly affect people. Interestingly, today, a small piece of gear that I bought, which is a Micro Four Thirds adapter, arrived, and I think that came from China. So things that are already in the system, they're going to be fine. Things that are being produced will obviously have a knock-on delay. So where does that leave us? Should we change our behaviour because of the coronavirus? Well, yes, I think we should. I think society should change their behaviour, but also I think society and us and people and photographers should get back to normal as quickly as possible. And rather than change everything in a knee-jerk reaction, we should make sensible adjustments to our lives. So I've been washing my hands more. I've been more cautious of getting close to people. I've just done sensible things like keeping a distance away from people, but not so much it's socially awkward, not shaking hands so much when I meet people in my job, and just being more mindful of things. As I know from my science background and other things, if there's something that is a risk that's easy to minimise the risk, do it. Take action to minimise the risk, and if it doesn't have any serious consequences, it's an easy win and it's a sensible thing to do. So going up a hill on your own to do some landscape photography is probably not going to be affected by coronavirus. Photographing a concert or photographing on a mosh pit probably is going to be affected by coronavirus, and you'll need to make a judgment about what to do and how to minimise the risk if you perceive there to be a risk. What a depressing episode, but I'm actually halfway through editing my Ricoh GR review, but I wanted to record this and get it out at a suitable time rather than it come out 3 or 4 weeks later when things have changed. So I hope you don't mind me changing things up, and I do apologise if I've depressed you with this podcast episode. If you can, please leave a review of the podcast on iTunes. It would really help the show out. Thank you. Goodbye.